with a focus on coming up with a master transportation plan for Sanibel. I'm Mike Miller, your mayor. I want to start off and introduce my colleagues here tonight. Councilwoman Laura DeBruce is with us. Hello, Laura. I want to introduce our city manager, Dana Souza. There he is in the back, and the executive director of the Lee County Metropolitan Planning Organization, Mr. Don Scott. Welcome, Don. And I also want to recognize the members of our Transportation Steering Committee that have guided this effort, and that includes Bill Millar, Erica Steiner, Evelyn Stewart, Pasquale Russo, and Matt DePaulis. Thanks to each of them for volunteering their time and effort to this task. And thanks, of course, to our city planning department, headed up by our planning director, Paula McMichael. And I should mention that this entire project is funded through HUD as a result of the Community Development Block Grant for Disaster Recovery. So we thank the people in the federal government for their support. Our objective tonight is to get your thoughts on what Sanibel's transportation network should look like in the short term, in 5 years, 10 years, and even 20 years. And for this purpose, transportation is a broad term, encompassing not only safety, but user convenience, safety on the shared use path, as well as roadways, traffic congestion, obviously, environmental concerns, and resilience. Your thoughts will go into the master plan, which we intend to have ready to go to Planning Commission by the fall, and then approval by City Council before the end of the year. So, in advance, thank you for your thoughts and your suggestions. And now I want to introduce Pasquale Russo, who's going to make some comments on behalf of the steering committee. Pasquale?
Thank you so much. I can't stress how valuable it is that everyone is here today. For those people that are here in the room and kind of dialing in remotely, this is really exciting to be part of this process. I'm speaking on behalf of myself and the other steering committee members. We feel like we're working very well with our consultants here, kind of challenging their thoughts, giving them some immediate reaction, but also giving them the perspectives of those of us that live on the island, work on the island. And what's really great is the way that the steering committee was put together is we have a really good balance of people looking at it from a wildlife standpoint, from a business standpoint, from visitors, from residents, and always looking at those perspectives on not just what are the little projects we're going to do, but what's the plan, what's the longer term resilience that we can build into this, but also taking into account the growth that we're going to have, not growth in size necessarily in people, but as we continue to grow as a community. And we think that that's really important. And a lot of the things that we've been impressed by the work that's been done by the consulting team and with Paula kind of guiding from their standpoint is really thinking about this differently than just cars. Right, everybody thinks of transportation as vehicles, and the reality is that they're challenging our thinking and saying, how do we move people? And how do we take and look at movement throughout the island and being able to enjoy everything that we have, keeping the pristine nature, but also being realistic about what's happening in the future and how we kind of grow with that and how we are prepared for that. So we're really excited about it. I can tell you we spend a lot of time as steering committee members really thinking through the content that they provide and trying our best to provide your perspectives to them so that they can react to it and come back with additional ideas. I've saw some great Post-its in the back. I think it's fabulous. Everyone's giving feedback. Give feedback. Ask questions, because that's how we do this. This is not fully baked yet. They're coming forward with recommendations and thoughts of ideas of where they can kind of move forward, and they really are looking for your feedback. I know I was putting Post-its up there as well earlier on, right? Because we want to make sure that we're all getting that feedback. And as we see the presentation that they're going to be providing and some of the ideas, it's going to start triggering thoughts that maybe we hadn't thought about and say, wait a second, now that you've put that in, what about if we went one step further, right? So without further ado, Ned Beyer, I'd like to introduce you and have you, did I say it right? I got it. So I'll hand this over to you so this way you can already have one up there already. Wonderful. I'll turn it over to you and your team and looking forward to the conversation.
Good evening. I feel like Captain Kirk up here, so they just. Thank you, Pasquale, for the introduction, and Mr. Mayor. Can you all hear me? This is better. Okay. Pasquale, thank you very much. Mr. Mayor, thank you for being here. Your words about the plan are perfect. Thank you for the City Council being here, representing the Planning Commission as well, and the steering committee members. And thank you for being here, because we were here on February 26th. How many of you were here in February? March 26th. Thank you, team. That's why we do this as a team. Some of you were here both March and February. So, yeah, so that's about half of you. So we wanted to come back. You know, the last 3 months, we've been working closely with the steering committee. We meet monthly with the steering committee. We often have conversations between Paula and steering committee members, Mr. Millar and others, between times. And so we're on a pretty fast track to complete this project this fall, going both to the Planning Commission and the City Council. But as stated, the cake isn't baked. You know, we're like the good idea factory, right? This is high-level planning. We're not doing a feasibility study. You know, we're not engineers here that have everything figured out, but we do understand the importance of a planning document looking ahead 20 years, having some vision, making it consistent with your the comprehensive plan of the city is really important, and we understand you're going through that comprehensive plan update process right now. Our team, we're working with that other team on the comprehensive plan, so planners are talking to each other, which is really important in this business. We'll make sure the plans are integrated. All right, with that, I've got a few slides, and then this is a team presentation because everything I do is because of my team behind me in this work. I work for Volkert Engineering. With me is Chris Supa. He's with Volkert. Melissa Martin, she's with 24/7. And then Nathan Coots, he's with Kittleson. Nathan's going to be doing a big part of this presentation because we're going to be presenting our initial recommendations for you to consider. But please, questions, stop us if we're going through slides too fast or you want us to make sure we describe something better, please do that. All right, so here's the agenda. I've already talked about the project. Going to review a little bit of information of what we've presented before, including what we heard at the first public workshop, and then get into our recommendations. About the project, again, this is high-level planning. This is not a feasibility study. This is not an engineering study, although it is comprehensive. And hats off to Paula and the city staff, the city manager. It's a tough scope of work. I mean, you put a lot of information in there, but it's good. You're getting a good analysis of existing conditions. You can see from our list here, we're going to be developing capital projects, capital improvements to make your transportation system work more efficiently, safer, is what you want. We're going to develop planning level cost estimates. And then we're also going to develop an implementation plan, a 5-year fundable plan with using local revenues, state revenues, federal grants, if available, and then also a 20-year vision. So we're going to put all of that together. And then, as mentioned before, we're taking the reports. Here's the anticipated schedule going before the steering committee. You can see August 19th, September 16th, and the week of October 26th. Presentation to the Planning Commission right now is October 13th. And you can see the City Council meetings in November and December. But we hope to complete our report in the early part of August. So if you want to see the final product, the steering committee meeting, August 19th. It's at City Hall. It's the middle of the day. I think it starts at 1 o'clock. That'll be a really important meeting. I'm going to introduce Chris Zupa from my staff. He's just going to talk a little bit about existing conditions. Some of you may have seen, just kind of a reminder where we've been. So, Chris.
Hi. I'm really happy to be here and talking about this plan, and I'm really excited that you guys are here to provide feedback. Just a quick recap. At the last public workshop, we spent a lot of time talking about the existing conditions analysis that we did. One of the things that we heard, let's see if I can hit the button right. Yay, I went in the right direction. One of the things that we heard, or questions that we heard, is with the hotel that is potentially being built, how will that affect traffic? So we brought that back to Nathan's team, and Nathan, on Captiva Island, we brought that question back to Nathan's team, and it's going to produce an additional 1,500 trips a day if it is built on top of 16,000, roughly 16,000, 17,000 range by 2050. So we wanted to, that was a big question that came up from the last workshop, so we wanted to circle back and present that to you guys so you knew. Just as a friendly reminder, we have done a crash analysis, and some of the things that we looked at is speeding, what the percentage is, lane departures. Lane departure is a big factor in the crashes, as well as nighttime crashes, as well as distracted driving, which are no surprises, especially in this day and age when we have a lot of distractions around us. We also did detailed wildlife strikes analysis. This played a big role in helping Nathan's team identify projects, as well as a toolbox of ideas that he will present. And now I'll turn it over to Melissa.
Thank you, Chris. I'm happy to be here as well. So I first want to thank you all for taking the time to share your comments and voice your opinion for this exciting transportation master plan. All your input is valued, documented, and taken into consideration for the study. We are excited to collaborate with you today to turn your ideas into reality. And we've had a ton of outreach methods that we've trying to get the word out. We've worked with all kinds of media outside of Sanibel Island, Fort Myers, Naples, and media releases, social media. Our contact list has over 600 individuals that we're trying to get the word out as best as we can. Each of your input is very important, and we very appreciate each and every one of you. As Pasquale said, community outreach is very important, so your ideas, they do not go unnoticed. And we had, at the very beginning of the project, we had 4 focus groups with different individuals over a 2-day period. That went great. We got a lot of great ideas and feedback from that, as well as our first public workshop, which brings me to this. We had it on March the 26th. We had approximately 66 individuals sign in, and we had about a dozen individuals that tried to sneak by and they didn't sign in, so we probably had about 85 individuals, really. We had a lot of questions and comments during the presentation, which we hope that we'll receive tonight from you all. And you can, if you were not able to attend our last public workshop, you can view it on the City of Sanibel's Facebook page. It's on. There's a link on YouTube if you have an hour that you're bored and just want to watch it. And that being said, we had a poll, and we got a lot of results from that. And for that, I will turn it over to Chris. Thank you again for all coming. Or excuse me, Ned's going to do this one.
Thank you. Melissa's done a great job, and one thing she didn't mention, a public involvement plan, and the other thing, she's working really closely with the PIO office of the City of Sanibel, so it's been working really well. So if you remember at the first meeting, we actually took a poll result, and people voted, right? And this was like project ideas. If for those of you that were not at the presentation, we presented ideas of projects. We didn't have specific locations already mentioned, right? So it was more like topics, like, does this sound like a good idea? So you could see the greatest response of support was the shared use paths. You know, you've got a really excellent system here. It's been recognized by the state. You're a designated trail town now. Congratulations. That was a big deal. So there was also some support for something called an island circulator, which is more like small buses that the island has had before. Some of you may remember that, but there is some support for that. The idea of a water taxi, that came up. That's something you don't currently have. Something called on-demand transit, which is like a public sector Uber, where the rates are subsidized, usually by a local government, but it's much less expensive than if it's private pay using Uber. And it is, places in Florida are doing this. You've got the hurricane recovery on your mind and flooding, elevated roads. That's something that's of interest to people. Parking, not on the beach, but new commercial parking in the town center district was mentioned by a number of people. Dynamic messaging boards, and you can kind of see some of that. And then we asked, what safety improvements do you prefer? Intersection improvements, which could be, you don't have traffic signals, right? You are so lucky in so many ways because of that. But you do have intersections. So what are some safety improvements at intersections? Crosswalks, slowing traffic down. And I know there's an ongoing education effort underway right now in the community. It's a problem pretty much everywhere you go in Florida, probably the nation. People go too fast. So that's something, you know, slowing traffic down. And then having some street lights, but in a very environmentally sensitive way. We are understanding about that. But it is, that could improve safety at least some of the major crossings. Then we had a third question, did we miss anything? Shuttle services, park and ride system, that would be probably off the island, on the island. E-bike regulation, e-bikes are very popular, but there's been some issues with e-bikes too. So I think our team understands that. Golf carts, how best to integrate golf carts within your current community. Infrastructure for electric vehicles, and then coordination with Lee County. And I think what that really means too is, as you know, Lee County is the operator of the causeway, right? So decisions about pricing, about improvements, about design, it's Lee County government that the city of Sanibel has to work with. And I think most people understand that now. And there have been ongoing dialogue with Lee County. So that's something that's important. And then we heard this from a lot of people, and it's especially the steering committee that we work with, protecting conservation areas, right? The Sanibel is a sanctuary city. You're a barrier island. Protecting the environment is really important. We understand that. And then here were some public workshop comments. And make sure you provide us your comments. We have forms in the back. We heard everything. We did hear about roundabouts, intersection signs for people that bicycle, reduce curb cuts with shared use path crossings between businesses. In the planning world, that's called cross access, which I believe is required in new development on Sanibel, according to Paula and city staff, right? Got it. And then the evacuation routes are important. And then mobility improvements, town center and parking was mentioned. Someone said we should build another bridge. Not, you know, it's not going to happen, but it's, you know, it's worth mentioning, right? So, dedicated bus pickup from Fort Myers Beach to Sanibel with drops off at beaches. Some people were very specific. Lee Tran provide a free seasonal service to Sanibel. You can see some of the other comments. Paula mentioned the focus group interviews. That's another way early on in this planning effort that we heard from people representing the Committee of the Islands, the Sanibel Captiva Conservation Foundation, the Sanibel Bike Club, and the Sanibel Captiva Chamber of Commerce. Having participated in these meetings, we typically would go for an hour and a half, 2 hours. We'd have 4 or 5 people around the table, and people weren't shy. We heard we heard a little bit of everything. So that really helped us. And because of all of that, we've come up with these project ideas. And then this is really the list that we presented March 26th to people, right? But we didn't have the details of where, what, specifics. And so with that, the lead-in, Nathan, you're going to tell us all about the project recommendations.
Sweet.
All right.
Welcome again for the third time. So we break our recommendations into 4 distinct sections. Guess I'm not that loud anymore. All right, so we break our recommendations into 4 main sections, right? Traffic, safety, wildlife, and what we call mobility, or multimodal. The idea being we're taking different pieces of it. As Ned said earlier, a lot of these, you'll see some larger scale projects, they need further analysis. What we've hit at with this level of a planning effort is saying that there is a possibility that this will yield fruit. It needs to be investigated. So one of the ones we looked at, we've heard a lot of debate about the potential roundabout and some of the intersection analysis, offering some options looking at, say, a quadrant roadway. Left turns are usually what kill intersection operations. So being able to move those around, it works in some areas. It is definitely something that needs additional analysis. It hits environmental lands the same as a roundabout, but it is something that has worked in other locations to kind of move those heavy left turns to a different location and manage them better.
Can you explain a quadrant roadway intersection?
So quadrant roadway, actually, I like walking. I can hear.
I would like your definition of a quadrant roadway intersection. I mean, you would think every intersection has 4 places or a quadrant, so I'm not sure what is different about this.
So a quadrant roadway with a regular intersection, depending on how not to get too into it, but depending on how phasing is and how you handle your left turns through it, can significantly impact the operations and how long you have to wait at that signal, what your signal cycle length is. Sometimes when you're overly weighted in a certain direction, you don't have a homogeneous traffic flow, you don't have equal people coming, you have like a very heavily weighted direction. Sometimes moving them from that to deal with that one heavy direction to where you might have a heavy direction this way and a left turn this way, and then you remove from here and deal with those heavy movements. You can run those heavy movements concurrently, whereas normally you wouldn't be able to run a left turn and a through at the same time. So it doesn't always work, but it is something that I think it deserves further analysis if the other intersection improvements proved not to be feasible. So a couple things. Want to be very cognizant of having a presentation. It's this great recommendation, solve all your problems. So one of the things that we started this project, we were asked, even though we're aware that certain things such as widening require referendums, to if it's something that's somewhat reasonable, present it regardless. So there's an educated decision that can be made. One of those things is a 2-way left turn lane. Having this conversation, when you're looking at a corridor, the intersections are where the inefficiencies are gained. An intersection is not just, Causeway and Periwinkle, it's also every driveway that you get that somebody stops and impedes the traffic flow. The 2-way left turn lanes, if you don't have significant turning traffic, it still allows them to move out of the normal traffic stream to be able to wait for the gap to safely make the turn without the additional traffic backing up from them. I will say that when we get to the multimodal recommendations, If this was done short to midterm, there is some efficiency to be gained for future recommendations as well, and we'll get to that. So it is something that the jump from a 2-lane to a 3-lane roadway in terms of capacity and what the roadway can do is fairly significant, whereas the jump from a 2-lane to a 4-lane is not as significant. Yes?
Yeah, I'll come over.
You had said that the tie-up is at intersections, but on Sanibel, our tie-up really leaving the island is the causeway. So even if all the intersections are clear, we're still feeding onto that 2-lane causeway.
What do you believe is the restriction at the causeway? Because you're coming from a 2-lane road on Periwinkle to a 2-lane bridge on the causeway.
Right, but at the intersection, there also are cars coming from 3 directions to feed into that 2-way thing. So you can increase the flow around Periwinkle. I just heard you say that the problem is intersections.
That's
and
correct.
I think our problem is beyond intersections. It is the causeway.
I would reassert that the problem is the intersections.
I think the problem at the Periwinkle and Causeway Boulevard, every time I'm sitting there, I could be moving if the causeway was moving. So to say the causeway isn't the problem, I don't think makes sense to a lot of people that sit on Periwinkle every day, and we can't go left. People on Lindgren can't go straight. They do a great job of moving traffic. They can only move it as fast as the causeway allows, and most days that causeway is backed up almost to Periwinkle.
Where do you find the backup at Causeway to be?
The backup on Causeway?
The Causeway is there is no stop at Causeway. Where do you find the backup to start in Causeway?
The cars that are sitting on Causeway Boulevard trying to get on the bridge to get off the bridge. It's not moving. If it were moving, I think traffic off of Periwinkle would move much faster.
So what I'm asking is, what is stopping the cars on the bridge?
Good question.
Causeway, a lot of people slow down to look.
They're slow, but are they stopped? Yes. So they're stopped in the middle of the road.
They're stopping at the top of the bridge.
Yep.
That, I don't.
Hold on. We have-
If they are parking in the road to sightsee, that is an enforcement issue.
I'm curious, when you're coming off the causeway, that you're going to, don't travel off the causeway at night or during the rush hour time. So this is just for me out of curiosity. If you're coming off the causeway and it's backed up, because I have seen it coming back on, and it seems like, in my opinion, as soon as you get off and the roads widen up and there's more lanes, the traffic opens up and it flows more easily. So that's why I think it is, or no, it's still backed up once you're going through the toll road. Okay.
So we talked about this at the steering committee meeting more than once. And Chris, he's also a drone pilot. You see his video running in the back, which documents exactly the problem on the causeway with the traffic, but then also documents the problem on Periwinkle. And I got to tell you, we had a meeting, I think it was in February, and we were at City Hall, and we left, and it was 4 o'clock probably, and we got caught in the traffic that you deal with all the time on Periwinkle. It took us an hour to go from Periwinkle out here in the City Hall area down to the intersection before you get the causeway. And then that took some time too, but that took about 10 or 15 minutes, and we were through. And so, I mean, I don't doubt you're right. There is a problem on the causeway, but in my opinion, in our opinion of our analysis, your bigger problem is on Periwinkle. And and we've been down here a lot at different times. And so both things can be true. You do have a problem on the causeway, but I think right now we're trying to identify improvements that Sanibel city government can implement themselves, right? The causeway is going to be there possibly could be a solution, but it's going to have to be worked by Lee County and the city working together. And there's been some conversations before that maybe can continue in the future, but we're trying to identify improvements on Periwinkle because we understand that's going to remain 2 lanes. So what can you do at intersections, or what can you do to help move traffic and make it safer for people? That's what our goal is. So I don't know if that really helped.
No, I think it's good clarification. To restate, it's not that we're disagreeing that there is a problem on the causeway. What we're saying is the primary problem is the intersection, and it's hard to evaluate the causeway until the intersection is working properly.
It's not just the intersection, it's traffic flow.
Mm-hmm.
Because when people approach the causeway and want to make a left turn, if it was just coming off of Periwinkle was the problem, then the police could handle that very well and send them right on their way. The problem is it doesn't work because people are coming down Lindgren, they're going all the way to the south end and coming back up Periwinkle from the east end. So you've got 3 flows of traffic all trying to find the shortest route, all backed up, feeding a 1-lane causeway. So you've got over 3 lanes of traffic, and if you go back and count Donex 2, you got 4 lanes of traffic feeding the causeway, which is basically 1 lane. You're not going to make any improvement by just speeding up how they get around that corner, because they're all sitting there waiting to have their turn to get off onto the causeway. And then all 4 of those places get backed up a lot.
It's good input. Okay. Yes.
Are you okay if I speak my, okay. I'm sorry. Yes, I had to ask the question because as a member of City Council, along with our mayor, Mike Miller, when we're in a public forum like this, we really both aren't allowed to comment on an issue. So if I want to make sure with our mayor that if I ask a question, that is all right with him, which means then though that he's not able to make comments. So Mr. Mayor, you're okay with that? Okay. So I wanted to ask the question because, you know, we had a very in-depth analysis done by consultants. I think maybe at least one of you up there are connected with perhaps with the study that was done. If not, have you read the study?
Yes.
Well,
Yes.
It was a very intense study. They looked into a great deal of analysis. And if you look at the council meetings and look at questions that were asked, what you'll find is that their conclusion was after, you know, in the event of a roundabout, it would basically save everyone from like an hour plus drive 5 minutes after all of that, and that would be it. So I hear what you're saying, but I think that as you're hearing from the people who actually live on the island and drive back and forth and get stuck in that traffic, that, you know, making that intersection faster, that report also said that we'd need to add traffic, small traffic lights, or you'd need enforcement there because the traffic would get backed up, especially coming in from Lindgren. So I think it doesn't seem fair maybe in this forum to make the comment that no, it's definitely the intersection and not the causeway when our personal experience plus the study we've had shows otherwise.
Thank you.
So I was saving this for the end of the presentation, and I'm getting a motion that we need to continue. So I'm not deliberately cutting you off. We have Q&A at the end. I actually 100% agree with what you're saying, and I don't think that the majority of the traffic improvements are I think there is a better option. We are here to tell you It will give efficiency, like the roundabout technically will give efficiency, but I do agree that in the end, sinking millions upon millions upon millions of dollars into additional vehicle infrastructure probably is not the direction that's going to save the traffic on the island. So if I can, we'll go through the traffic. I would look at the traffic as the short to medium term solutions. It's not going to save congestion on the island. It will help, it will not save it. So looking at the cross-access opportunities, some of those are roadway connections, some of them are cross-access between businesses. The idea being that in certain places, if you can stay off of Periwinkle, you don't have to go through the Periwinkle and Causeway intersection. You're being able to at least individually save that and potentially remove that additional traffic off. So just looking for those shortcuts. And then closing some gaps. There's a few places where there's gaps. Once again, it's just looking for areas to build out the network. Give yourself option and freedom of movement to where if you are, I think it's right over here, you don't have to drive all the way around to get over here, right? You can make the connection. And then there's a few places where a more in-depth traffic analysis, looking at continuing at the Causeway Boulevard in Lindgren, Bailey Road, Sanibel, and Palm Ridge, Rabbit Road and Sanibel Captiva, Sanibel and Periwinkle, and then Dixie Boulevard and Periwinkle. I believe Dixie Beach Boulevard and Periwinkle was listed as there being a site distance issue in one of our steering committee meetings, but this is a mix of those issues plus the traffic. Yes, sir.
A lot of those are because of their safety recommendations based on the crash analysis too. At
Yes.
Intersections, so.
One of the things we'll look at as well, and this kind of ties into the multimodal improvements, is looking at upgrading some of the crosswalks, making sure we have high visibility crosswalks. I know it's a little bit of extra paint, but nationally there's been a lot of studies and the compliance rate is significantly higher even with just the ladder style versus the 2 bars. Look at locations for rapid rectangular flashing beacons. We did notice heading toward Captiva Island, there were some run off the road crashes at the horizontal curves. So adding the chevrons there, and then looking at speed management strategies, such as horizontal vertical deflection, roundabouts, splitter islands, things that can be done to where it's not speed bumps, but you are having that traffic calming effect. This map just kind of showing some of the upgrades to existing crosswalks, recommended new crosswalks. The purple is where the chevron signs, and we have nature safe lighting. We want to be very careful with lighting because of the environmental concerns, sea turtles, et cetera, but making sure that's safe. And then just trying to lay out where our crossings are. One of the things I do want to point out is when we're looking at crossings, there's an idea called I was talking to some folks earlier called the fantasy pedestrian, and that's where we say, here's a crossing, this is where you're supposed to cross. That doesn't really work with people, especially when you don't have a fence up. They're going to cross where they feel like it. So really when it comes down to it, it's not where we want them to cross. What we should be doing as planners and engineers is looking at where people are determined to cross and finding a way to make that safe. We did a small amount looking at wildlife protection, mapped out a lot of the data from the wildlife strikes, some of the different species. And we did not get deep into this. What we did is looked at a kind of a toolkit of what could be used, once again, hitting the planning level. So looking at being careful what we plant near the roadway, making sure that we're not attracting species that are wanting to feed right there. There is a recommendation for poles, alter bird flight paths. That's a very strategic recommendation. They've used it in a few different places. I would not recommend that widespread. Installing wildlife culverts and tunnels. There's an example of one here. This is a bit larger. They can be different sizes based on different species. It would have to be something that is designed to be unique to that species in that location. And then looking at fencing in strategic areas to guide the animals to those crossing points where they are going to cross underneath the roadway. So looking at nighttime visibility, one of these things, because there's 2 ways, right? There's one of where we're trying to guide the animal behavior, and then the other part is how do we get the human aspect to interact with them more safely. So being able to see that there's an animal on the road at night helps you avoid that animal. looking at seasonal nighttime speed reductions. If there's a certain area where you know that there's going to be a high animal activity, being able to call that out, call for a speed reduction. And this was, I think, a recommendation that we got from some of the groups about adding signs to encourage reporting of roadkill. And I think part of that goes into, my assumption is that it's allowing them to identify further habits of where things are happening and respond to it, not a biologist. And then this install raised crosswalks and roundabouts for traffic calming. Once again, that's just getting into that controlling speeds. The faster you go, the less time you have to react, and the more fatal hits are. Rough map of the locations. This is where I kind of want to pause for a minute. These are our multimodal recommendations. And this is where the conversation, ma'am, was going about the traffic improvements maybe not doing as much. When you're dealing with an area that is very constrained, not just by values, but also by land. So environmental, right? You have environmental lands that have a whole, even if you wanted to mess with them, they have a whole slew of different requirements and things that you have to address to be able to do that. And then from a value standpoint, you want a natural Sanibel, where you don't want to affect that. When you're getting into, say, the roadway widening conversations, you have sensitive businesses and you have an island feel, the community feel and the aesthetic that you want to live in. There's really two ways of handling traffic congestion. 3, you stop traffic, which isn't really viable. Traffic's going to continue to grow. You forever get into a cycle of widening, because there's an idea called induced demand, that when you make it easier to get to someplace, more people will show up. And then the third way is mode shift. And that's where you change the mindset from, are we moving cars or are we moving people? What do we care about? And my son and I got into it the other day, and I was talking to him, when you're driving down the road, think about how much space on the island is dedicated to driveways, parking lots, and roadways. And if there was a different option. So a lot of these multimodal recommendations we're going to talk about, they can be implemented piecemeal, but I think they work really good as a system and a solution, with the idea being that you have freedom of movement. If you have the desire or the need to use a personal vehicle, the roadway is still there. But you also have options to be able to take. And then also with visitors, you may get into a situation where you may never have to use a vehicle to get to the island, and you can spend your entire time on the island experiencing everything without having to use your own private vehicle. So the shared use path out here, the network is fantastic. You've got a really good shared use path plan. There wasn't much that we would add to it. There was a few conversations about connecting a few communities that don't have it already that we added in. Lee MPO has done some work on high-speed bicycle paths and some design typical sections. So I know that conversation with e-bikes is coming around, and you're already in some widening projects for the shared use paths. So being able to make sure we're accommodating all users. But we want to look at the new path extensions as well as the shared use path master plan. 3 big connections that weren't in the master plan. Look at the Pond Apple Park Trail between Bailey Road and Causeway, Island Inn Road between Tarpon Bay Road and West Gulf Drive, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service between Sanibel Captiva Road and West Gulf Drive. Bike lane feasibility study was brought up, but if I'm being honest, I think that maintaining that path system separated from the traffic, it provides a much more comfortable user experience, and you'll get a lot higher adoption rates by giving people their own place separate from cars. One of the things we're looking at as well is, if we're avoiding the causeway, how do we get to the island? So looking at water taxis, like where are people coming from? What would make sense? Whether that's at the landing of the causeway where you already have a lot of hotels, there's potential for building other infrastructure for parking, restaurants, et cetera, being a place where you could start there and then move your way over to Sanibel, being able to connect Sanibel to Fort Myers Beach or going up the river, basically finding ways to connect people through that without having to get on the bridge to come over. The circulators, we have some example pictures. All of this can change. When it comes to transit, all of it is, there's the idea of how it functions, but what it looks like and how that works is all negotiable. So when we're looking at that, you're looking at circulator routes where it's predictable. You have good headways, the bus is moving around. You have the on-demand transit that Ned discussed earlier. It's very worth looking at, especially when we're talking about multimodal concerns. Think about it, especially if you're not familiar with the area and you understand Florida weather. You hit your bike, you're right to Jerry's, you're coming from the beaches, and then it's 2 o'clock, and what happens? It's thunderstorms, right? You either wait in there, or you can, if it's a rental, you can exchange at the mobility hubs we're going to talk about and take a ride back to your place. Once again, we can upgrade those to look at trolley service. We spoke with a woman who had said that they had a circulator that was successful. It was discontinued after a while, but it was initially successful. One of the ideas with this as well, we talked, remember, about that two-way left turn lane? That can be scavenged to provide queue jumping for your buses. So at that point, you would focus on the immediate traffic alleviating effects of that to get the turning movements out, but then later when you're ready to do a harder adoption of transit, now that bus doesn't have, or that trolley doesn't have to sit in traffic anymore. When I say bus, I'm not necessarily talking about like the big ugly ones. Like, it can be a nice aesthetic, but you're skipping the queue of traffic. You're getting outside of it and you're able to get past it, and it becomes something that's very viable. And then the mobility hubs that we talked about, it's the idea that, once again, the freedom of movement and choice, being able to transition from one mode to another. So if you got here in a water taxi, what do you do when you get here? Being able to call an on-demand service, be able to hit one of the bus stops for the bus rapid transit or the circulator, being able to jump on a bicycle, an e-bike. You have those options at that mobility hub to be able to switch based on what your needs are at that time. And then one of the things that we discussed as well is when we're working with that on the infrastructure side, working with it on the policy side too. It looks like a lot of this, some of this has been adopted already in terms of like eliminating minimum parking for new development. We could also discuss looking at incentives for developers and existing businesses to redevelop parking. If you think about what Sanibel could be, when you look at all those parking lots, if you moved to the people model where you're not needing the storage space for it, and you start getting into more natural areas where you've recovered it, or even stormwater retention, natural stormwater retention, to where you're also dealing with some of the resilience issues with the king tides and the flooding events during rain as well. And then potentially the seasonal tolling on Sanibel Causeway, because then it starts pushing people to those other alternative options like the water taxi to be able to get around. And then Chris wants to make sure that I remind all of you to scan the QR code and take our poll. It is one of the many ways to provide input. We're going to be around for Q&A. I know we had a lot of questions earlier, so we can do some of that. There's comment cards on the back. If you're shy, if you're not shy, we have a ton of different options to listen. Ned, you want to close?
Sure. Before you leave, Nathan, there might be some questions. Someone won the board game. Okay. There might be some questions there. I can see people now. Are there questions from any of the slides, any of the projects that Nathan just described to you? When you walked in, you were given a list of what was presented as well as some maps. So you have that. And as Nathan said, there's comment cards or sheets in the front and then also the back. So we will stay here as long as needed to answer your questions. I think there might be another slide. Not really. I think the important thing here is there's still time for your input. We're working really closely with the steering committee, with Paula and her team at the city. And we've got probably about 2 months before we really finalize the recommendations, first at the steering committee and then with the planning commission and then city council, as I mentioned, in November and December. It's been a real honor to lead the team and be selected to do this plan. I hope you feel this plan's important. I will say, you know, sometimes in a plan, it's not what you do, but it's what you don't do. And one of the things, it's making this a little bit more difficult or challenging, but we've heard loud and strong across the board, we don't want road widenings. Sanibel is a unique place. We're different than most places in the state of Florida. So don't just do a cookie cutter plan, widen a bunch of projects, widen out intersections. It's not going to work here. That's not what we want. So it makes it a little more challenging, right? But we have identified some things we think will improve congestion and safety. And there's some, as Nathan pointed out, there's some long-term projects here that are more visionary. But that's good. You need some of that too. So, you know, thank you for being here tonight, and just let us know if you get any questions. And there is a question.
Isn't a question, it's more of a comment.
Yeah.
Going back to what was said earlier, I live on East Gulf, just about a block east of Lindgren. And so I continually have that experience of trying to get from East Gulf to off the island on the causeway. And I've waited an hour, literally, from East Gulf and Lindgren to get to the causeway. So I'm very familiar with the congestion. I'm very concerned about the emphasis on trying to get as much traffic as you can to the point of getting on the causeway. That's really, that is an issue, clearly. But, you know, if you spend any time watching during the peak season, that traffic, it backs up on the causeway. And the reasons for that are various. You know, you're trying to get a lot of traffic into one lane, because it's not two lanes, it's two lanes, but going in opposite directions. So you only got multiple traffic feeding into one lane. But more importantly, you've got tourists. And so tourists, yeah, they gawk, they look, they're paying attention to what's going on around them. They're not, you know, and the speed limit is reduced anyway. So it's just a matter of trying to get, you know, 5 pounds into a 2-pound bag. And so I'm not at all convinced that a roundabout or trying to improve that particular intersection is going to get traffic flowing faster. I think if you just, you know, spend time and really watch that, you'd see that, yeah, it's a volume of traffic that you're trying to narrow down into a funnel, into one lane, and it's it's just hard to do.
Good point. And, you know, again, this study, this team is not making the decision on the roundabout. That we're staying in our lane, right? But if you think about it, that first slide got a lot of attention, but most of our slides were about other types of projects. And Nathan, in particular, the multimodal projects, that I think addresses more circulation within the island, in neighborhoods, in a real thoughtful way of not just widening roads, because that's not going to happen. That's a non-starter. So I think, in my opinion, the multimodal recommendations are probably something that you haven't had, and you probably really do need that. And then I think some of the other safety improvements too, but that's kind of my takeaway. You want to add?
Yeah, no, I think, let me back up real quick. So I know we disagreed on a couple things, but I am with you on the fact that intersection improvements aren't going to save the traffic situation. They aren't. They'll make it better temporarily and by a degree, but long-term, thinking about what the island looks like, the place that you want to live and what you want to cater to. When we look at our traffic in 24 years, you know, you went 14,000 to 18,000. It's going to keep growing. You can see the growth that's happening. Sarasota, Manatee, Cape Coral, like on the other side of the interstate. Port St. Lucie is growing into the state as well. The state keeps having conversations. It's something to think about as well. So I'm going to paint a picture real quick, right? Grew up in Florida, Central Florida. So we would come, if we did a day trip, we'd go to Anna Maria. It took us about, supposed to take us about an hour and a half. We could make it in an hour and 10 minutes, taking 64 and 37 down. Sanibel we'd come to for about a week during the summer every year. We don't really go to day trips to the beach anymore because the same distance has now taken us 2.5 hours to get there. It's not a day trip anymore at that point. It is going to continue to increase. The state keeps having a conversation, and there's been a number of studies. They have been ended so far, but there keeps being a conversation about putting corridors down the middle of the state. Because right now, you have the interstates on the side and US 27 about finding additional north-south corridors. One of the things that that would do, if that happens in the future, is it's going to open up a lot more developable property within the center of the state and a lot more growth. So you'd have those people visiting your beaches as well. The traffic's not going to decrease. So if the traffic's not going to decrease, and the way of handling that is widening, if you stick with the single occupancy vehicle model, the congestion will only continue to grow worse. We'll get small efficiencies here and there, but at that point, we're playing with efficiencies. And that's where that discussion about the multimodal system comes in, because at that point, you can still have enough visitors coming on that you're keeping your businesses afloat, you're keeping the recovery there, so when you want to go out to eat as a resident, you have a lot of options. You won't have as many of a vacant property because the business went out. But you're also getting the benefit of a really natural beach community that's not dominated by asphalt. Asphalt, there's a lot of studies out there if you want to talk about urban heat islands and look at how much heat asphalt stores and releases overnight to make the area hotter. The aerialization of tire rubber, there's a lot of things that happen with it. Not anti-car, but just in terms of freedom and understanding that it's going to get, the efficiencies that we can gain from small projects are going to get overwhelmed by the traffic growth that's going to happen. Yes, ma'am. Yep. So if I can say one sentence to wrap up my thought, it's just think about 25 years from now, 30 years from now, 40 years from now, what you think traffic is going to look like if nothing significant changes. And that is not an argument for widening, because once you widen, you're just still going to keep doing it. It's how are you going to move those people that show up without increasing the congestion or ruining the experience of living here. Okay.
So my question relates to the 2,000 trip increase you see, and maybe it's a question more for city staff, but I'm curious about how built out Sanibel is right now. I'm not aware that there are 2,000 more people worth of building out to do in the coming years, but I don't know your research for knowing what that figure would be.
It's not building out here, it's what's happening on Captiva. But Captiva is a separate number. They have 2,000 without Captiva. But where are the people from Captiva going to get off the island? Well, but that's a separate line. That's the 1,500 is the third line.
So those projections are coming from the Lee County 2050 LRTP. So it's a projection of what the growth in traffic is going to be that's looking from the Lee County area for the entire area, including Sanibel. One of the things I'll say, I understand the development argument, but you also don't have 100% occupancy rates on some of the resorts as well. So with the demand, like if it's, I'm just throwing out numbers, let's say it's $1,000 a night. There's a certain level of amount of people that are going to pay that to show up, a percentage of the population. But as the population grows, the number that's included in that percentage is also going to show up as well. Yes, ma'am. Yes.
So Pasquale, once again, part of the steering committee, and all of our steering committees are recorded and everyone, so I'm not saying anything out of school, I don't believe. We have all looked at and have guided the consultants to think long-term. I drive I grew up in the New York area. I know what congestion is, right? I've seen techniques work and some techniques don't work. I scratch my head every day why the toll plaza is even there, right? Oh, you've got 3 lanes going into 1. And then you've got 1 that people have to slow down, which is causing some of the congestion you guys are thinking about, right? You guys slow down your vehicle to get through a 10-foot wide thing and hope you don't clip your mirror or something like that, right? So I've seen it in Massachusetts. I've seen it all over the place where they've moved to these high-speed tolls that don't slow down. It's not high speed, still go 35, right? Our guidance, our questions that we asked is, do what we can do that's within our control, but don't wait to go to Lee County and fight to have that toll removed. Don't wait to fight for the funding that Cape Coral's getting right now to have this extra bridge put in. If all it's going to cost is $30 or $50 million to do that extra lane, and don't make it 2 lanes coming on. Make it 1 lane coming on and 2 off, right? We can't take any more cars. I go down Periwinkle, I try to eastbound, I try to make a left turn into some of the businesses, and in the morning at 9 o'clock I can't, and that's with a single lane coming on. So yes, those are longer term things, and they could take 2, 3, 4 years. Our guidance is start the process. And our guidance is really not to them. Our guidance is going to be to the Planning Commission, and it's going to be to the City Council. But start the ball rolling, right? But if we wait and make this linear and not tackle these other items, then we're going to be looking at each other. And I was saying to some people earlier on, Ian was 4 years ago. So when you're talking about 3, 4, 5 years to get something approved to get done, it's a blink of the eye. It happens, right? So what can we do that is a game changer? And I personally am intrigued by this multimodal thing because, and that doesn't mean a bunch of scooters whipping around, right? It's not like we're going to do Citibank scooters in New York and lemons or limes somewhere else. We're not talking about that, but there's other ways that you can move. So change the dynamic, get us back to that beach community type of feel. And, some of those numbers that are going up, we're only at about 70 to 75% of where we were before storm as far as people living on island. In a month or 2, this place is going to be crickets, right? So this is just getting us back to where we were without another house being built, right? So it's going to happen. So we need to think differently, and I think that's where I've been encouraging everyone. Ask questions, put ideas. No idea is a bad idea. Put it forward, let them think about it, let the leadership in our city look at it and say, how do we fit this into a plan? But my hope is that we can implement some of these things within the next year and some in the next 2 to 3 years and more, and still have a vision as to how we're going to get there in the next 20. And that's really what I'm encouraging everyone to do. And I know as kind of my role on the committee is really kind of for the public outreach and the publics that are coming in. I'm not part of any organization per se. And I have a ton of people that come to me all the time like, what about this? I'm like, give your ideas. Put the ideas out there, let them start thinking about it. But this isn't a one and done. It's not going to be, hey, let's fix the bridge, that's the problem. Well, the bridge is only part of the problem. I said we got three lanes on the tolls coming in. Well, guess what? You've got Lindgren, East Periwinkle, you got three going into 1 here. So why do we have 3? Maybe we should only have 2. Shut one of them down. I mean, there's things we can do that can make it a little bit smoother instead of everybody fighting for position to try to figure it out. And those poor gentlemen and ladies that are sitting on that intersection trying to guide everybody getting yelled at by everybody, right? So let's tone it down a little bit. Let's get some ideas, and let's figure out where we go, because it's going to happen. And if we just sit here and say, no, 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 punt, and let's talk about it next year, then we're going to have the same issue, just going to be a little bit worse. So my ask of everyone is give your ideas, talk about it, and, it might be controversial, but at least they'll have something to react to. So sorry about that.
No, you're right. It's and to support him on that, the project process for bridge projects is long, especially if there's federal funds attached to it. You're talking about years before you get there, and that's assuming that you immediately have funding and you don't have to go through a prioritization process. So he is right. It's when you're dealing with that, if you want it at all, you need to get started with it.
Thanks. A quick question for you. I know the roundabout is very controversial on the island. I'm a big fan of them, by the way. I've seen them work very well in a number of communities. But one of the other things that I know, in fact, in Lee County, and we're putting in a couple of those as well, is a double diamond intersection where you kind of shift people on different lanes. Did you look at that as a solution as well?
It takes a lot of space. We were tentatively suggesting some of the other ones, like the two-way left turn lane. I figured you'd run me out of town on a rail if I suggested a diverging diamond. I'm not that brave.
Lee County directs the causeway. Have Lee County been involved with this Sanibel traffic study at all?
We have engaged Lee County in some of the conversation. Mostly about the bridge. They're not overly concerned with what you do on the island. Lee County's stance was, it's not my place to say their stance. They would like to see, I think, they would want to have a larger conversation. But yes, we've had a couple conversations with Lee County.
Yeah. And then I want to make sure that Lee County Metropolitan Planning Organization, Don Scott is here. He was at the other meeting. We've had numerous conversations with the team. So they've been very engaged, Lee County MPO. So, and then we also have had conversations with Lee Tran because some of those multimodal types of programs, Lee Tran would be one of the implementers of those programs, right? So there'd be that coordination. So it's going to take a partnership of agencies. So that's a good point, sir. Yeah, everybody's got to come to the table. We're going to be here till probably 8:15, so take your time. We'll be here for questions. Again, thank you for being here tonight. We really appreciate it. There is one more question, and that's Mr. City Manager.
Thank you. I just wanted to wait till the end since there was no questions, but just to share with you where we are with the roundabout, since that is the subject on most people's minds, is that council's direction was we received funding from the MPO, and Executive Director Don Scott is here as really county representative, transportation representative, provided funding to the city. The city council decision was to use the funding that was available to to conduct the survey of the intersection. For those of you who have been involved in that or been following the process, there was a conceptual design that City Council funded, and it was a request to move to 30% design, and Council didn't move in that direction. City Council then funded the study because many residents said, you need to study the causeway. We studied the causeway to determine whether or not there could be 2 lanes off in the existing conditions, whether or not it was too much of a constraint on the spans. The county authorized us, it's their causeway, they authorized us to do that study. And that study came back and said, it is not safe with the constraints that we have on the spans to have 2 lanes off and 1 lane on. So that study was complete. And then the funding came from the MPO. City Council authorized us to move forward with the survey so we could understand whether or not the conceptual design that was prepared would fit within the intersection. And then when that comes back to council will make a decision whether or not to send that question to referendum. Should there or should there not be a roundabout at the intersection of Causeway and Periwinkle? So that's where we are. That survey work is nearly complete, and it will be at an upcoming city council meeting soon over the summer. I expect that we'll have that. Could be July, could be August. And then council will make that decision whether or not to send that to referendum for voters. So that's where we are in terms of the study, because our consultants here said no pun intended, they stayed in their lane so that this roundabout study could move on under its own momentum and direction by city council. So I didn't want to leave the meeting and then have you say, Dana was there. Why didn't he tell us this was coming up at a meeting? So there you have it. That's where we are with the roundabout study. Please stay tuned for it, so when you can comment when it goes to City Council again.
Thank you, sir.
And did you have something else? Yeah.
I didn't mean to grab the last word from the city manager. I'm Paula McMichael. I'm the director for the planning department. I just wanted to add, I know we had a lot of conversation about the roundabout. There's a lot of concerns about the roundabout, but we have a lot of other great projects, possible transportation projects that we're looking for your input on. So if you haven't been able to put your comments on those boards in the back, please stay a few minutes. Give us your feedback on those other projects that the consultants have talked about and presented to you tonight. And thank you all very, very much for taking the time to come out here tonight.